Hey, folks, welcome to Free Press Sports with Carlos and Shawn. Just a quick word for those of you who are listening with us. Carlos is off this week. He's maybe I should say he's out this week. He will, I presume, rejoin us next week, and we will look forward to that. But in the meantime, we have a guest, actually somebody that I've been wanting to get into this podcast for since we started, basically. And the truth is, it would probably be a little bit more fun if we had him when Carlos is here, but this is going to be okay too. I want to welcome in the person who is my editor, Carlos's editor. Anybody that works in sports is editor. He's the person that makes all of our sports coverage at the Free Press happen, oversees everything. And I thought it would be fun to bring him in to sort of talk about the process, to talk about himself a little bit. I know there are a lot of you out there that may have particular quibbles with the individual beat coverage or what a column has to say, but there are also some times where people have ideas, listeners, readers, y'all have ideas about the Free Press coverage itself. And are we slanted towards Michigan over Michigan State, for example? That's the biggest one. Is there a blue wall or whatever? But oftentimes, do we have any kind of agenda when it comes to the Tigers or the Wings or anything like that? And I just thought it'd be fun to kind of pick this gentleman's brain about all of this, and he can tell us a little bit about how he got into the business and why sports matters so much. All right, I've talked long enough. Kirk Crawford, thank you so much for coming in here today and joining our little podcast.
Shawn, it's a pleasure to be here, man. And as you know, yes, I hate your school. It's just a given, no matter what. Whichever school you root for, I can't stand them.
No, you can't. You can't. You're actually, you're a Chippewa, right?
That's right? Fire up Chips. I'm a graduate of Central Michigan University. Not that plays into how we cover any of the teams in the Mid-American Conference. We probably wrote more about Eastern Michigan in the last school year than anything else because of Amani Bates, of course. So yeah, I always enjoy my inbox is chock full of accusations that I hate/love. Insert school here between the two in the Big Ten, and I get a chuckle out of it quite often. So.
Well, okay, we're going to get into that in a bit, but before we do, I just want listeners to get a little bit of an idea about who you are and kind of how you got into the business and where you're from. Do you mind talking about, where you grew up, why journalism, why particular sports journalism, and kind of what led you to this seat that you're in today, which is, to me, one of the best seats in the country and one of the best sports sections of the country. Okay, fine. I'm biased. Yes, I am. But, there's some metrics that back that up too.
I am equally biased, and my my computer time would tell you that it's certainly one of the busiest sports towns in America. Yeah, man, I grew up here. I'm born and raised in the west side of the city, the northwest side, and I'm a graduate of Renaissance High School in 2002. So I was able to watch Malik Harrison and Joe Crawford up close and personal back when when high school basketball was a huge deal, certainly at Renaissance. And I've just always wanted to do this. I mean, my earliest memories as a person are the 1990 NBA Finals. I'm 5.5 at that point, and that's some of the first things I remember as a person, just in general. That's the tail end of my kindergarten year, and just being allowed to stay up well past my bedtime at that point to watch Vinnie Johnson's jumper from the right side with 0.7 on the clock to clinch the title was a huge deal. I went to a Perry drugstore opening on Oakman Boulevard, for those of you who are familiar with Detroit geography. Right after that, and John Sally was the special guest, and they stuck a microphone in the 5-year-old's face because it was cute and he wanted a question, and so I count that as my first interview in the business. It's as best I could count that. I've just always wanted to be. I've enjoyed the stories of our area because when you dig deeper into what the Pistons meant culturally in that time in the late 80s and the early 90s in this area. And then you learn about the Tigers and its impact, or their impact, not just in the 1980s, but certainly in the 1960s. And then my parents were both young children during the 1967 rebellion, uprising, riots, however you want to term it. So I have always felt this deep connection to our area and have grown to appreciate how, especially the teams that we remember most, how and why we remember those teams so well from the 1990s Red Wings, but learning about the Dead Wings era leading up to it. That's what drew me into our industry, telling those stories and sharing those stories. And, one thing sort of just led to another. And my work at Renaissance High School connected me to the Free Press back in high school. And at that point, man, it was a match made in heaven, some would say.
So you graduate from Renaissance, you go to the journalism school at Central Michigan?
That's right. Yes. I was fortunate enough to win the Lem Tucker Journalism Scholarship in 2002. It's a scholarship that still goes on. Lem Tucker was a journalist who worked for all three major television networks at the time in the 1970s and 80s. He was the second Black student body president of a mostly white, basically, college university in the country back in the 1950s. And again, had an established journalism career. And in the late 1990s, Central Michigan developed a scholarship for in his name. He'd since passed on and is a native son of Saginaw. So for the last more than 25, 30 years now, the CMU has been awarding a scholarship to a young journalist in the state. And I was that person 21 years ago now. And that connected me not only just to, access within this industry and sort of plying my craft in a lot of different areas. It's also where I met my wife. And It's also where, most of the good things that have happened to me in my life have been associated with that scholarship one way or another. So
then you get your degree in journalism at Central.
Yes.
And you said you were hooked up with the Free Press before. Was that through that was the high school program, but did you eventually get under the prep crew at all?
I did, yes. So I not only was a part of the high school journalism program as a student, but even I did 2 summers as an apprentice with the Free Press. It's the same program that people like Jamel Hill participated in, and even several of our other current editors today, James Hill, who's the senior editor with the Free Press, and Brian Todd, who's one of our web editors at the Free Press. So it was kind of almost like a minor league, more or less, or like a prospect camp, if you will. And that's another thing that still goes on, not necessarily in the way in which it was originally implemented, but it still continues to this day, thankfully. And so I did 2 summers there. And the second, in between there, my senior year is when I first joined the prep crew, which many of us, most people who are in sports journalism start there at somewhere or another, in some avenue or another. You're taking scores from high school games. So I have a pretty well working knowledge of all the high schools in the Metro Detroit area and most of the state of Michigan, honestly. And that's how, is by learning under, even tangentially under the tree of Mick McCabe, who we've had on the podcast here before, and is a Hall of Famer in every sense of the word. So, yeah, it went from prep crew, and then when he got back from college, I was able to get into the community Free Press process and started freelancing in that way. And then luckily, the Tigers were actually good that year in the summer of 2006, as you remember. And people had to be moved around and shuffled. And I kind of moseyed my way into the sports department that way. And the rest is history. They can't get rid of me, I say, at this point.
You've been there ever since. You kind of worked your way up. You were assistant sports editor for a good long while. And then when you got when you get the big seat, which is now what, it's been a year and a half.
Oh, this is year 3 now.
No, well, what?
Yeah, man.
You know what it is? It's the COVID year.
Yeah.
Okay, you're right. So it's 2.5 or two
and some change now. Yeah,
2 and some change. Yeah, okay. Sorry about that. It's the COVID year. It bends time still.
It does. It does, man. Like, you just look up and you almost forget that seasons happened. It's amazing. Like, you went to the NCAA tournament. Basically, you're stationed in Indianapolis for 2 months practically between the Big Ten tournament and the NCAA tournament. And like, it's a blur. It's just a blur. Yeah,
sometimes I have trouble remembering what year. I mean, exactly. I know the 2020, I guess, right? But sometimes it's just kind of, it's amazing how much that all has changed. The sports landscape, it changed. The budgets of a lot of businesses around the country, including newspapers, it's changed how we cover stuff. There's a lot of other stuff that's changed how we cover things too. And I'd like to talk about that in a minute. But
sure.
Getting back to getting your position. What was that like for you? I mean, obviously you were maybe I shouldn't say obviously because I don't know that our listeners know this, but you were the first Black sports editor at the Free Press. So you made some history there, which is pretty amazing, right? And I don't know how much. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, it was. I mean, that was definitely that was a lot to think about. The history element of it was definitely a part of it, and having someone in that position that understands our audience and the teams and how important sports plays as a role in the lifeblood of our industry, quite frankly. Not to toot our own horn, but we have a big role in keeping the Free Press solvent as best we can. And that's a big responsibility, understanding that shepherding our coverage and making sure that we are covering what we need to cover and making decisions about what we, don't need to cover or how often we need to cover. It's a great responsibility. And there was a lot going into it. It was more than just, all right, I'll take the gig. Let's do it. Like it took a lot of really, thinking about, man, do I really want to have that level of responsibility?
No, because I don't know that any of us start out. I mean, maybe some of us do, but you don't necessarily start out, I want to run the Free Press Sports Department 15 years down the road or whatever, right? Or 20 years down, or I want to be a columnist. I never thought about being a columnist, to be honest. I had different ideas. So now there are some people that do. Mike Rosenberg used to write for us and is a fabulous columnist, works for Sports Illustrated. Told me one time he wanted to be a sports columnist since he was 12. Right,
Wow,
and some folks know that. Do kids grow up wanting to be editors necessarily, or do they want to be reporters? Or writers?
I think they're. I mean, especially in growing up, there's much more of an allure to seeing their name in the paper and seeing, being the front facing property, right, or the entity. Growing up in our area, that there are. Everyone wants to be Bill Bonds, and there aren't, you could name Reggie Hall was the sports producer at Channel 7 for years and years and years. No one really knew who he was, right? I mean, but there is a great responsibility in making that tapestry good on a consistent basis. And as you know, Shawn, we're painting on multiple boards. We have not just the digital space to handle, but also we still produce a paper every day. And that's as important, trying to handle both of those at the same time is its own sort of balancing act.
No, absolutely. And a quick word about, you were talking about how we help keep the Free Press solvent, obviously, and everybody has a hand in that to a degree, but the importance of sports, and it is a great responsibility. I don't know how great that is for our larger society that newspapers need sports in that way. It's funny. I had a really good friend of mine is a op-ed writer in Charlotte for the Charlotte Observer and also part of their opinion page for the company that owns them. And he was joking with me that the circulation numbers have gotten a little bit better in Kansas City this fall because of the Chiefs and the run they made to the Super Bowl, and because of Patrick Mahomes. And he was like, okay, do we really want our democratic institutions? And I know we're not a government institution, but we are an institution, and we're a democratic institution, small d. And do we really want a quarterback to have a role in the success of how we get news about the city council out, the school board out, and police force and fire and businesses and environmental issues, all these things that are super important to how we kind of all live? Do we want a quarterback to dictate to some degree how much people are getting that information?
Well, that speaks to sort of the larger issue of we're the fourth estate, but we're the fourth estate that's not backed by government funding, right? Like, where's the other three pillars of democracy or houses of democracy are taken care of by taxpayers, right? So in order for us to be able to do that type of reporting, that's extremely important. I think I've actually been chastised in the past in meetings and sort of calling what we do as the toy department, whereas it's not just the toy department. What we do is vital to our audience and is important to our audience based on the numbers that we see, and also provides us the runway to do those important things, like making sure people aren't being corrupt, making sure government isn't lying to its constituents, and making sure that people are held accountable on a day-to-day and week-to-week basis. The unfortunate part about that is that costs money, and that revenue has to be raised somehow. So, yeah, it helps if Michigan is good that year,
Wait a second. I thought we just said there was no blue wall, and out of the 8 examples and the 8 teams we have, you picked Michigan to say, that's why we hope they're. I'm kidding. I
got to feed the narrative somehow, Shawn.
That's right. But it's funny to me, and we're going to talk about. We're going to take a break here, and we're going to come back and talk about this. But it's funny to me that something as innocuous as that, as innocent as that, what you just did could be, aggregated or whatever, right, and turned into.
And to that point, there's also a reason why I didn't say another school. But again, that gets deeper into, what we may be getting into later. But yes, there is a reason I said Michigan and not some other schools quarterback, so to speak.
You could have said the Lions, of course, because they, and this is the last point I'll make, talking about what's good for business. And look, we're not giving away state secrets, industry secrets, Detroit Free Press secrets. The Lions are by far our biggest driver of interest, of traffic, of video, of
podcast downloads.
Yeah,
absolutely,
of everything, and that makes sense, and that's true in most markets around the country. With an NFL team, right? I mean, it's the most popular sport in our country, so it makes sense. And this is one of the best NFL markets in the country, despite all the history of losing, right?
It's untapped potential. Just how on fire this area will be. I mean, we even see it now for a team that went 8-2 in the last 10 games last year and missed the playoffs. We couldn't produce enough Lions stories, interest, content, however you want to term it, last December and January. We couldn't do enough.
No, look at the traffic from what we had with the draft and all the interest. Dave Burkett, our great Lions beat writer, who we have a frequent guest of this podcast, wrote a story about Jahmyr Gibbs within the last few days and a little bit about his background. And I can tell just by, and I'll give you listeners a little secret. You can tell sometimes. Okay, so look, I know we're going to get to this break real quick, but just this last thought, because I'll forget this. When you look at our website in particular, and you see where things are placed, a lot of that is an editorial choice. But there's also a calculus, a logarithm. There are in effect AI or whatever we want to call it. Right? There's a computer that's making that choice based on how often it gets clicked, right? So it's sort of, that's not an editorial choice. That's you guys making the choice for the Free Press in a way. by opening up, and then you're moving it around. So when you see, for example, Dave's really good piece on Gibbs that ran a few days ago, when you see that linger on the site in somewhat of a prominent way, that's because you're reading it, right? And
Absolutely.
I mean, sometimes an editor can come in and try to give something a boost and move it around and say, hey, this isn't, we think this is a good story. We want to put it here so you'll see it more easily. For sure, that happens. And it's not like we don't control our own digital space. We do. But it's based on, to a large degree, what you guys do. Right, Kirk?
Without question. It's why, especially in the mornings where, a great deal of our traffic happens between 6 a.m. and noon. When we write about the Detroit Lions, whether it's Dave or you, Shawn, or Carlos or Jeff or Mitch or whomever, you'll see that prominently placed because the evidence, the numbers tell us that our audience gravitates to that story or those types of stories at a much higher rate than almost anything else that we produce. And not just within the sports department, but some would argue even within the entire business between that and autos news, or if there's some breaking news, national story that happens, if Jared Goff says or does or moves something, or Dan Campbell says something even semi-viral, it's going to resonate extremely well with our readership.
No, for sure. And to the larger point here about why we cover what we cover, and we get into Michigan State, and I also want to ask you too about, is there room for coverage that's, I mean, obviously we do high school preps, but maybe not quite like we used to, but is there room for just coverage and stories that aren't just the day-to-day grind of the 8 major teams that we write about, right? Now you could bring in the soccer team. I mean, a lot of people would argue, should that be our 9th team with that popularity? But that's a different conversation. In any case, so let's get into that, but let's take this break. I keep promising and failing to deliver. And we'll be right back with more Free Press Sports with Carlos and Shawn. Welcome back to Free Press Sports with Carlos and Shawn. So, Kirk, as we were saying before the break, and let me just ask you this point blank, do you feel like there's the same room, space, maybe even interest to write about? Because the sports seeps into so much of our society and so much of life. It's not always just the main teams that we love and root for, main professional teams, colleges. Do you feel like the way the landscape has changed in our business the last 5 years even, but 10, 15 years especially, still allows for some of the storytelling?
I think there's marketplace for it. I don't know if it's marketplace for us to do it necessarily. Take DCFC, for example, right? There are some great stories there, and not just the players on the team itself, but we've done the types of stories with the fans, and certainly that the march into Keyworth Stadium there in Hamtramck, like we've done that story. And it's not just a great story to tell. It's extremely dynamic. It's very photogenic. It's a fun thing to do. Audience does not gravitate to it in the way in which I think from virtue-seeking people would want us to think it does. It's not there. So can a magazine do it that's hyperly focused on soccer or the soccer scene in the state of Michigan or in this region, cover it much more succinctly? I think so. I don't know if it's a great use of our resource to devote a great deal of attention to it consistently. We're finding the same thing with the Michigan Panthers in the USFL, right? They've just returned home and have played a couple games at Ford Field. There was less than 10,000 people at both of those games in a 60,000 seat stadium. Now, what does that tell me? I take that into account a little bit, but I also take into account that those stories, especially the stories written and that we covered when they first got here, did not take off to a great level that it had the previous year when they were in Birmingham. So it helps determine and dictate how we want to use the resources that we have, which have dwindled and are shrinking. Do I try to ask my team to pay as much attention as possible to that? Or do we lean upon the things that we know our audience is going to be interested in? So that's the balance, right? Because we still need to do the news. We still need to do things that are important to our community, the things that people want and need to hear about. We still need to hold people accountable, these entities, especially, from a college standpoint. These are public universities that the two schools that people care about most around here are. So there are some accountability things that we have to keep tabs on. Does that mean that we don't write as much about Hope College? Their women's basketball team has been great. Unfortunately, yeah. I mean, there's some give and take there, and that's a part. It's maybe the roughest part of my job is making those decisions of, yeah, but I don't know if we can.
And that's really what's changed. It's funny, just to give you a little, to give you guys that are listening a little insight here. Kirk and I were talking recently about a story at a small school out of this market, in another part of the state, and some Olympic level gun facilities that they have for shooting. And part of the reason I was interested in it also is because they were sort of pitching their new facilities and their training, the programs they have at this college, as also being protective of the Constitution, that they want to make a statement. And that tells you something how they feel politically. And as a columnist, to me, that's interesting because I can sort of talk about the sport part of it, but also then the larger ramifications of why this college feels like it's important to promote this sport. Well, it's not just because of the sport itself, it's because of where they feel like they fit in society, what they're trying to do in terms of educating the people that come across their campus. And I could tell by Kirk's immediate reaction, if I had told him that 6-7 years ago, he would have been, oh, okay, that's great, go. But I could tell by Kirk's immediate reaction, we're going to have to think this through more, because it does really come down to resources and our ability in this business to see by the minute who's reading and or who's listening has been a great tool. It's allowed us to act a lot more like a lot of the rest of corporate America in terms of understanding our customers. We've never even referred to our readers as customers.
No.
We've always, but they are. Newspapers have been kind of stubborn about that because we think of ourselves as the force of state and having this importance to society. In any case, the information, all that data has been great for a lot of things, but what it's done, though, is I think cost us this idea where, oh, okay, that's a good story over there. That's a story the public needs to know. We're just going to put it in the print, and people that are going to read it, they're going to read it. We're not going to worry about who reads it and by how much.
Right.
And I mean, to me, that's probably the biggest change that I've seen in the last 20 years in the business, other than just the lack of budgets and the shrinking resources and so forth.
It's a catch-22 in that we have been given no other option but to try to operate as efficiently as possible. And the double-edged sword nature of being more efficient is, just like in basketball, it's not taking shots that you have a greater likelihood of missing. And some of those shots, like the story that you're bringing up, it has to be told in a way and presented in a way to where it can be as successful as possible. And there's more work that maybe needs to be done there than it would riffing about Brad Holmes for 25 inches. You know what I mean? Like
it's true. It's true.
And not make it sound as simple as that, but yeah, it in some instances it is that simple to where, do you write about the Lions again? Okay. I mean, if there's something there that's new and revelatory, yeah, we do. But we can't, and that's sort of that's the conundrum that our industry is in, right, Shawn? That we are kind of stuck between being a product and also being the responsible bastions of truth, justice, and the American way, not to steal from Superman, but that's kind of what we're trying to both be at the same time, right? Like, yes, we're going to protect you, but please buy our product, right? Like that's kind of where we are.
Right. And this obviously ties into this idea of the blue wall, because so much of that is, I mean, maybe not all of it. There's a lot of emotion that's involved in that too. And people are thinking with their gut, and rightly so. That's fandom. That's why we exist. It's why we have jobs, to be honest. If fans don't care, I mean, think about it. Think about what we do. It's sort of not ridiculous, but it's unfathomable in a way that somebody watches a game on television or goes to a game in person and then wants to have somebody else tell them what they just saw.
Right.
Right. I mean, that's,
if nothing else, to either as a affirmation of their bias, or to, in some cases, hate read it after the result occurred that they didn't necessarily enjoy.
No, for sure.
And then they become even more inflamed because we are telling them, yeah, this is the result you really didn't like. Here's why it happened.
Right. And so the idea that we make money off of that sort of human, I don't want to say proclivity, but just that human nature of that, the human desire for that, when you really don't see it. I mean, think about, because we are in the sports are entertainment. I think they're more than entertainment, but I don't want to get too pretentious. They are first and foremost entertainment. But think about with a movie. With a movie, you do or a TV show now, because TV is so cinematic, and that's kind of replaced our movie experience to a large degree. Or even a really good restaurant. You read what people think about it before you go, generally.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes you might come across something, you watch it, oh, that's great. I want to go see what other people are thinking about it. And obviously there are these other layers too now. And it's true in sports where you're watching something and you're in a chat room, or you're on a text thread or whatever in live in real time, or right after the episode. There are websites out there now where you can go break down the show together. There are podcasts that do that.
Absolutely.
So there's still some of that. So it is changing a little bit, but by and large, we're really the only ones where you go to the sport and then you seek out the word, right?
And our job is to make what we do the first thing you see when you're seeking out that sort of reaction or analysis upon what you just saw. That's
the fight we're in, right?
Yes.
Because there are a lot of other people that want your attention too.
Absolutely. And that's kind of funny to kind of, that is what we do. And we understand that the audience that we're serving is extremely passionate about what they see and whom they root for, and in some cases, whom they root against. So we try to write and produce, understanding that there are folks on many different parts of that spectrum of fandom, a part of it. We know that people who are reading our stuff haven't watched football for the first time necessarily, or they're not thoroughly unfamiliar with the rules of basketball. But, they may not know the difference between Jalen Llewellyn and Kobe Buffkin, per se. Or in some cases, they may completely know.
Right. That's another thing that's interesting about sports when you're writing about sports, is that you assume who's reading so much, which goes against, like, I didn't study sports writing when I got my journalism degree. I have 2 degrees. I have a history degree and a journalism degree. I didn't study. So it kind of goes against what you're taught.
Absolutely.
You don't ever want to assume the reader knows anything. Now you want to treat them with some basic level of respect, and assume that there's a few things they understand about living on this planet, right?
Yes,
for sure. But in sports, the assumptions that if you're in that space with the writer, a lot, right? We write to those assumptions. But get back to you were talking about the passion and the decisions and the resources, and I want to finish up with the idea of this blue wall, but I hate to divert one more time here, but
that's all right.
This keeps it in the same vein. There may be maybe the breeders are used to it at this point because it's been going on for a couple of years now, but I want to acknowledge that we don't cover our professional teams. The lines we do, football's different. They're only 6 or 17 games now, but we don't always send our beat writers on the road now, right?
Right.
With the Wings, with the Tigers, and with the Pistons. We make other decisions sometimes too. Do we want to go to certain conferences? We question where we always used to go, as a matter of fact, like the Big Ten meetings and football meetings or basketball meetings, and how many people are going to send. Those decisions too. But the main thing is, can you talk a little bit about that and why we have to do that and how challenging that is for you? And maybe that's going to be even more challenging if one of these teams really gets good.
Yeah, it's almost like you hit, you get a certain amount of food, right? And you have to try to make sure that everyone within your house eats. And there are certain times where there's certain aspects need certain, more food, so to speak. Like, we're going to go to every Lions game. As you mentioned, there's only 16 of them. There's only 8 or 9 of them on the road. There are 41 road games in the NBA and 41 more in the NHL and 81 in Major League Baseball. So you're talking about, what is that? Almost 160 different hotel nights, right? And many, many, many trips into the airport and back and forth and all over the continent, so to speak. And even in some cases away from the continent. Last year, the Pistons were in Paris and Michigan basketball went to London. So yes, a generation, 2 generations ago, there would be no question we would send someone to every road contest. But that was also 2 generations ago where we had 5 editions to the newspaper. And, just the basic economics of our model were different and not as constrained as they are now for everybody in almost every arena, right? So we have to make some of those decisions about, do we need to go on this road trip out to Western Canada, or do we need to make this quick jaunt to Cleveland and Indianapolis for the Pistons and then back here to Detroit? What the digital age has allowed us to do is be able to try to cover teams from afar in some instances. But I don't like not sending our writers to places. I don't like, we had to make some decisions with Michigan State and with Michigan football this year about how many times we send writers to this, that, or the other. How many writers do we send to football games? I did not enjoy pulling people off the road, but that was a necessary part of what we had to do.
So, kind of getting to this idea of the blue wall, and I think it's layered here. Some of it is just plain cynical business sense from Michigan State fans. I think that, Michigan's, it's a business decision, right? So you're going to go after Michigan and you cover more and so on and so forth. And then some it's much deeper, psychologically, that there's the dynamic between the relation between the fan bases, the dynamic between the schools, how we think of the schools academically, and all of that. And are we pushing the agenda of one school over the other? And this crops up periodically. I'm trying to think of the recent best example. Maybe you can help me out here. I think our colleague Reiner Saban was at the Combine and wrote a story about Michigan State not having any players there, or maybe it was before the Combine. And it was a piece looking at the lack of Spartans that were going to be drafted and how that's a reflection of where Mel Tucker's program is at the moment.
Right.
And that came, what was it? There was a Michigan piece. I wish I could remember the details, but anyway, that piece frustrated some Michigan State fans. And then maybe it came on the heels of a Michigan piece. It may have been Reiner again too. Maybe it was somebody else that they thought should have been more critical and wasn't. But that happens. Yeah, that happens all the time.
I mean, look, you could someone who was staunch on one side of the argument or the other can pick apart any sort of set of circumstances to affirm what their point is, right? The bottom line is this. First off, we, as a member of the Gannett group, between ourselves and Lansing State Journal, we probably write slightly more Michigan State stuff in our state than Michigan stuff, right? If you include what we get with Lansing, which we use often.
But readers don't make that distinction. Right?
Readers don't make that distinction. And I understand that, and I don't expect them always necessarily to do so. Also, it doesn't fit their narrative if they do. So I understand that also. Yes, the numbers and readership for our stories that are written about Michigan football do better than Michigan State football pretty much all the time for years and years and years and years and years. What we don't do,
except when they're really good, can we make that point?
Except when both Michigan and Michigan State are really good.
Yeah, I mean, when Michigan State football is really good, they drive traffic pretty.
They do well. Yes,
they do really
absolutely do well. They don't do as well as if Michigan is also good.
Right, but if Michigan State's really good and Michigan's mediocre, then Michigan State draws better traffic. We've seen that.
Yeah, yes, and we've had that happen in the last 10 or 15 years. You know,
several times.
You know, the run that Mark D'Antonio led, and the struggles that Michigan went through. Yes, we from a page view standpoint, yeah, Michigan State when they went to the Rose Bowl and then went to the college football playoff in back-to-back years, they were the hottest thing going. Absolutely.
And I know you want to finish your point, but basketball too, because it's not quite the same with basketball, right? If they're both good, Michigan State basketball draws evenly or better than Michigan basketball.
Yes.
Usually better.
Usually better. I mean, but also they are usually in the conversation for a national championship in many instances. And while Michigan is, well, this past year, Michigan wasn't, there was also sort of an expectation that maybe Michigan State could. And then all of a sudden they found themselves in a position where they were in the middle of this run, got to the second weekend. And of course, you know, Shawn, you had the front row seat to that run this year that culminated at Madison Square Garden. But yeah, Michigan State basketball is an international brand, not just a national brand. It's an international brand. It's ESPN wants them on foreign soil playing basketball, typically. So yeah, like that, we have the fortune of having two major college sports brands in our backyard, and we try to cover both of them as fairly and as equally as possible. Now, if, you know, all things being equal, one sports team will be read better than another sports team, and vice versa, basically, if with basketball. But that doesn't mean that we try to hide or not cover or not uncover things that are nefarious or fishy or need to be called out upon. We were very, very tough on Jim Harbaugh his first 6 seasons at Michigan. I thought if the Mel Tucker situation doesn't get better, I would imagine we are going to be tough there as well. As tough as we need to be, you know. There's also a definition of what is tough, right? Like if we're not singing some coach or team's praises, then there's a thought that we are being biased, to which I can't help you there or unexplain why, that's not necessarily bias. It's criticism.
Well, it's interesting, just speaking about tough, and I think it's different with college with the pros, maybe not with the coaches so much, but certainly with the players. I personally, as a columnist, I'm not as comfortable being as critical of college players. Yeah, I know they're making. I know they can make money now, but they're still not making money directly from their employers, so they're not professionals. They're making money off the marketing opportunities, right? And that may change. I don't know that would change how I still feel about it, because we're still talking about 18 and 19-year-olds in some cases, and I don't think they deserve the same criticism that a 25, 30-year-old vet does in a professional league. But that's a different story. But I wrote a column right before the end of the regular season about Michigan basketball, and they had been playing better, a lot better, right?
Mm-hmm.
And had I'm trying to remember if they had lost. They had a couple of late overtime losses at Indiana and Illinois, and I don't remember if that was part of the column or not. But the idea was that, no, it was before those. They had started playing better, and they put themselves in a position with a couple of wins to get in the NCAA tournament. And I wrote a column basically saying sometimes you just have a year like this, and the goal is just to keep getting better, to watch your young guys develop, which they had. Kobe Buffkin had definitely gotten better in particular, and Jet Howard was a different story. But anyway, what I wrote in that moment was true. And then they went out, lost a couple of tough games, and then just played really poorly in Chicago in the Big Ten tournament. And by that time, the column just kept looking worse and worse, right? But I got a lot of people really mad at me, Michigan State's, saying that's because you're part of a cabal at the Free Press that favors Michigan, when in fact, no, I'd written a column about Juwan Howard at the time that I thought was true. He didn't have his best season, but he was starting to find his way late, and then it ended up falling apart after I wrote about it. But I thought, that, right? So sometimes you write something, it's true, and then a couple of weeks later, it's not.
What I try to live by from a philosophy standpoint, especially with that criticism, is, look, if you disagree with the opinion that we have, or that Shawn has, or Carlos or whomever, disagreeing with the opinion is fine. I mean, he or she has a stance in one spot, you disagree with it. Okay, that's cool. I just, what bothers me is truth, or lack thereof, or saying, well, you guys only wrote this because A, B, C, D, and E, and F. Like, wait, that's just not true. So no, I mean, our thought pattern on when we write and when we publish, and how we go about, producing content on a daily, weekly, monthly basis is not, we don't get the red phone call from athletic departments saying, hey, you need to write A, B, C, or D. Like that doesn't happen. That hasn't happened.
Or that we'll lose our privileges, right?
Yeah, right. We're not writing scared of offending someone, or if we ruffle enough feathers, we'll be put in timeout. Like that just, we can't operate that way.
And we don't operate that way, do we?
And we won't operate that way. Like that's,
even if it's just you and Dave Burkett left in the sports department, right? You're still not gonna. I don't want to think that.
It's just not gonna. We're not gonna do that. We're not. From a journalistic standpoint, and yeah, that's still an important part of it. Our job is to describe what we see, and analyze what we see, and be critical when it's time to be critical, and praise when it's time to praise. And I think we do a fair job of that in all accounts. And if it wasn't, then I guess I'd be running out of town, I suppose.
No, and the last point I'll make is, obviously, and you acknowledge this, I certainly do. I think everybody in our staff would. We do make mistakes sometimes, right?
Oh, sure.
I mean, not only do we make typos and errors and all that, we've always done that, but sometimes you write something and you're like, I wished I would have thought that through just a tiny bit better. I wish I had more time. Wish I'd thought maybe differently about it. Or I wish I'd had this piece of information I didn't know that might have changed something. Because we have to put out ideas and reports all the time, every day, basically, right? There's going to be some of that. It's not. I'm not justifying that we get stuff wrong occasionally like that, especially when it comes to opinions. We always want to be right when it comes to facts. Okay, this team beat this team, this means this.
Yeah.
In the standings, whatever. We don't ever want to get that wrong, although even occasionally we might get a typo in there. But sometimes, yeah, you do. You want something back occasionally and think, okay, God, I wish I had thought of it that way. That's human nature. But we don't want to get the facts wrong, right?
Absolutely. I mean, that getting the facts right is a non, that's the baseline. We could be wrong about thinking a certain play should have went one way or another. That's part of our job. Like that's part of it. There's going to be, my staff's least favorite thing is doing the game predictions. I know it is. It's also
I hate it. I hate it.
I know Shawn hates it. I regret almost sending the email out every week.
I don't think a lot of reporters like it, actually.
And I understand that. I get
it. Turns us into bookies.
Yeah. Well, that's a different conversation altogether because, some would, people have been using the newspaper industry to be bookies for years, for one way or another, both above and below the table. But, yeah, man, like we're going to get stuff wrong. Like, but what we don't want to do is commit errors in judgment because we were lazy or because we just overlooked something thoroughly. If we thought someone should have ran the ball more and then it ends up being to where they have the best passing offense in the world, okay, I guess we got that wrong. I mean,
yeah, if you think the Lions needed to sign Lamar Jackson, well, it's the
a sore spot for some folks on this podcast.
The poor fella's not here to defend himself. I said that because I didn't want Carlos to feel, when he listens to this, if he does, I didn't want him to feel completely left out. But all right, look, this has been great. We're going to take one more quick break. We're going to come back with to wrap this up with a quick my favorite thing. So you got a couple of seconds to kind of get that right.
Absolutely.
And we'll let Robin, our producer, work his magic, and we'll be right back to wrap up Free Press Sports with Carlos and Shawn. Welcome back to Free Press Sports with Carlos and Shawn. Kirk, this is the time of the show where Carlos thinks we need to say what our favorite thing of the week was. Sometimes that's an odd phrase for maybe what you want to talk about that was most meaningful. And favorite maybe isn't the right word if it's something that had a little bit of discomfort to it, but it was important. So I don't want to just say, think of it as your favorite ice cream. But I assume you've listened to the show enough to know that you have some room here to talk about something that was important to you this past week, or that you particularly enjoyed, or just what's your favorite thing? Superman ice cream. I don't know.
I'm more of a vanilla guy myself. Actually, cookies and
I'm a chocolate
chip
guy.
Cookie dough. That is my proverbial jam. I wanted to shout out a frequent guest of the podcast, Lindsay Green, our restaurant critic, was just named a finalist for a Pulitzer Prize winner of Pulitzer Prize, which is practically, if you know anything about journalism, that is our Grammy, that is our Emmy, and she was nominated as a finalist for the award for criticism. She wrote a very, very interesting column that I think was that she came on the show and talked about, if I'm not mistaken.
I think she did, yeah. And we're going to try to have her on here pretty soon.
Absolutely. So I just wanted to shout her out. It is a career landmark being nominated as a Pulitzer Prize finalist. And she's done a great job in the short time that she's been with us with the Free Press, and she has stomached our invitations to the podcast more than one occasion. So
she's been a good sport. That's a great thing. I was going to actually mention her, and I'm trying to remember. Forgive me if I did this last week. I was trying to remember what day it was announced that our new editor, Nicole. That was last Wednesday, right? Okay, so yes. So maybe we did mention it, but obviously we're all thrilled and excited for that opportunity to work for her. A lot of us at the Free Press have over the years, but to have her kind of running the show and with her passion and her energy and her creativity, her smarts, we're looking forward to that. My favorite thing, real quickly though, actually happened when we were recording this podcast. I had to take a tree. We had to have a tree cut down. It was supposed to happen a little bit later, not interrupt the podcast, but anyway, they came. They were a little bit early, and I hear some chainsaws going up. The next thing I know, when I'm recording, initially I was at a different spot in the house with this. I was at a window, and I could see the tree coming right at me and right at the house. And it did clip the house. It just got a gutter and one of the front posts. But when it was falling, we're talking about a 50, 60-foot tree. When it was falling, I started moving back. I thought, oh, my goodness. Am I about to be? I wasn't worried about my house at that point. I was thinking, am I about to be in big, big trouble here? Fortunately, it just clipped it. Didn't quite get all the way to the main house. Just the soffit and the gutter and so forth, and a little bit of the post, and nobody outside was hurt among the crew. So that's by far my favorite thing. That because fallen trees, as we know, can get to be nasty, serious business. And so nobody was hurt. There was some damage. So what? Nobody was hurt, and we're all good. And we got to finish recording the podcast. So that's definitely my favorite thing.
My now new favorite thing is that Shawn's gutters are strong enough to withhold the brunt of massive trees falling from the tip of the tree.
Yeah, it hit a little bit of the soffit, a little bit. It just kind of, yeah, exactly. So, no. How could that not be your favorite thing? But anyway, yeah, congrats to Lindsey Green. Congrats to the crew that they survived a falling tree.
Yes, and congrats to Shawn's house. Yes, for withstanding it.
I feel fortunate and blessed that nobody was hurt. And in any case, thanks, man, for coming in. We're filling in for Carlos. Big shoes to fill, but yeah, you did a nice job.
Absolutely, man. Now, anytime, and I do listen every week because I have to, I got to screen it as a
because you have to make sure.
Team. It's a joy to listen to it on a weekly basis. I'm trying like heck to make sure we get as many people in front of it as possible. So,
Kirk, I just wanted to thank you for coming in and filling in for Carlos. They're big shoes to fill, but you did you did a nice job. I know it's not necessarily easy to come in. You're like you said at the top of this podcast. We're talking about your career and how you got into it. You're behind the scenes. You have tremendous influence, more than anybody else in the department, obviously. But you're behind the scenes, so it's not always easy to step out on the stage.
I mean, I'm glad to have been able to have been asked, and anytime you need me to come and fill in, I can only do so much in terms of trying to fill in for Carlos here, whom we miss, and hopefully we'll hear back again next week. But it was a pleasure anytime I get a chance to talk with you, Shawn. It's always a pleasure, man.
I look forward to it, and we have the privilege of getting to talk several times a week. So it's one of the better parts of the job, to be honest with you, for me, and I enjoy it. I mean, yeah, it's certainly not writing. Right?
No, we don't want that getting in the way of that.
No. I'm kidding. I always joke. I like to say that I don't enjoy writing at all, but I love having written. And so that's one of the best feelings in the world. So to get to the having written part, you do kind of have to write. No,
occasionally that's true.
Yeah,
I'd rather break down Golden State split actions, but
exactly. I know.
Here or there.
Yeah, me too. It's the one thing. It allows us to be a sort of a fan outside of because we have to stay professional within this market. In any case, all right, look, we need to thank some people. First and foremost, let's thank Robin Chan, our producer for the show. Let's thank you. We normally thank you. Here we get to thank you in person. So, I thank you for coming, and now I get to thank you for making this podcast possible to your face.
You're welcome, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, there we go. And we want to thank Anjanette Delgado, who's our editor at the moment. Right?
That's right. That's right. She's still with us and still running, helping us from an audio standpoint.
Absolutely. She's really instrumental and has been instrumental in this podcast from the start. And she's going to be in this role for a little bit longer until we collectively pass the baton on the Nicole Avery nickels. But we also want to thank you, the listener. And as we tell you every week, you can find us wherever you find your favorite podcast, at Spotify and Apple. When you get there, subscribe, give us a rating, give us a shout, tell us what you think. Hey, if you want to make a complaint, we're here for it. Until next week, Kirk, when you will be back on the other side of the microphone editing, and or not editing, but making sure we don't say anything too inane and stupid. Well, until next week, we will rejoin you with more Free Press Sports with Carlos and Shawn.